Well, good evening. I'm Lynn, N7 CFO, and going to do a PowerPole PowerPoint presentation. Now, simultaneously, several hundred hams nationwide discovered PowerPoles when I think it was Popular Science published an article about it. And I read that article. I was like, holy cow, this sounds great. So I called them up. They sent me a catalog, ordered a bunch of them, put them together, and took them down to the Issaquah Amateur Radio Club, and people just flipped out. We did quite a number of bulk orders, and away we went. And it wasn't too long before PowerPoles became the area standard nationally. Now, I'm going to be talking about a bunch of stuff, and I will email out a list of links to the things that I mentioned, so don't worry about copying stuff down. So, PowerPoles. Why? They're inexpensive. It's about $1 for a pair of them. They're versatile. They're easy to install. The contacts, when you slide them in and out, are self-cleaning, and they're color-coded. They can be ganged together. They all fit together very nicely, and they will handle up to 45 amps DC. And there's a huge amount of commercial accessories available, and it's easy to build your own. And I'm going to show you a bunch of the stuff that I've done. And they're automatically polarized. If they're properly assembled, you can't get the polarization backwards. They're the Aries standard, which ensures interchangeability. If you've got an emergency going on, you pull up. If everybody's using PowerPoles, you can plug into it and go from there. It saves a lot of time and eliminates the possibilities of equipment damage. And above all, they work. Commercial accessories. PowerWorks has got a bunch of them. Auto power off. A lot of VHF, UHF radios have got it. You can set, hey, no activity, shut the power off. This will do it for you if your radio doesn't have it. There are bunches and bunches of these little splitters to where you can run off of a battery, power supply, or whatever, and then pick up your power. The Rig Runner's the one I like. It's got nice mounting holes on it and stuff. I've got 2 of these in my pickup truck. And the newer Rig Runner, complete with USB. Now, these are the ones you got to be a little careful of. They no longer call it a cigarette lighter socket. It's an accessory socket or something like that. And there's not a lot of consistency company to company with how much amperage these things will handle. And I would sure take a look at the size of the wire, see if you can find some specs on it or whatever. But for light duty, these things work fine. Note, this one has built-in fuse. Here's the power gate. This is my installation. Those 2 batteries, each AGM, 118 pounds each, which explains the little cart that I've put them onto. And they're held in a true float charge by the power gate. And if the power goes out, it instantly picks up off the batteries. Now, I was running the Red Cross net one night, and I had my Yaesu right in front of me, and I was at mid-sentence, and the power went out. And it was kind of, because the radio was still lit up, but I was sitting in the dark. And I said, well, hey, the power went out. And I kind of got some notes in front of the display to where I could read it. And away we went. I talked to people later that were listening to me. And they said there was not the slightest hint. There wasn't a crackle, a pop, a fade, nothing when it made that conversion. It was just lightning fast. They've got newer models of it. These are really slick. You've got your DC in and your power out. So homebrew stuff. This is a good one. I've made these for my relatives. You can hook onto a battery, and if on the other end of it, you stick one of these sockets, you take your cell phone USB charging plug, stick it in here, and you can charge off your automobile battery when it's sitting in the garage. And you can charge a bunch. The only warning on that is if you do put your cell phone under the hood of your car, for crying out loud, put a sign on the steering wheel that it's there, okay? You need a fuse in your circuit. There it is. Just plug her in. Grounding, super easy. Note that I went to the green on this. Now this is my 2005 Toyota Tundra truck. I got a big PowerPole, and they make these things big enough for golf carts. I mean, they're the size of candy bars. And does the mouse show up? Yeah, good. The gray box is a fuse box, and through the firewall, I've got two of those panels with, 5 or 6 PowerPole outlets on them. Now, I set this up to where that I could unplug it, which disconnected everything on there, which hopefully would take care of power drain. And if I had a situation where I wanted to just operate off the battery, I could unplug it and then plug in this pigtail on the right, and there's a whole bunch of DC power for you. Can you read that? One day, son, all of those perfectly good AC adapters, which have long outlived the products they were originally designed for, will all be yours. And I have got a bunch of them. Now, what you do is gather these up, and I see them free all the time at swap meets. And especially the one, Stanwood Camino, they've got a big free table, and I gather these up and cut off the little transformer and pitch it. Because the last thing you want to do is try soldering one of these miserable little connectors. There's no standard to them. They are tough to do, but they're real easy to crimp onto a power pole. And if you experiment around, you'll find that you'll have some that it's going to fit your radios or your other equipment. This is in my camp trailer, mounted over the kitchen table. I've got power coming in from the back, power poles here, power poles on the other side, sockets, and then USB. I put this together myself. I got some of the parts from Vetco. Here's a good one. If you're operating field day or whatever, want to know what your operating voltage is, there it is. Or take a VOM and a cheap set of test leads, cut them off, stick power poles on, and you can get it digital. Now, I put this together about 15 years ago. It's just a tiny little LED. There's a resistor in there. And it's been going continuously ever since. It just kind of lights up one little tiny area of my shack if we get a power outage, and it's backed up on that battery system I told you about. I'll have that to go by. Inverter, plug her in and you're ready to go. And I use this all the time in the trailer. The light bulb is kind of handy if you're testing, and I also use it as a way of draining a battery to recharge it. Because it's one of the old incandescents and it uses up a pile of electricity. So then you get into adapters. This is the old Aries standard here. And if you've got to go to it, there you are. And then you've got these strange T connectors that come with a lot of radios. Same thing. And you can mix and match to come up with what you want. This is an oddball. I'll tell you, some of these that have got a positive on the outer ring and stuff just drive me absolutely nuts. Here's another one. Okay, we know about batteries joined in parallel, same voltage, double capacity, right? Here's the easy way to do it. Oh, come on. You plug one battery in on one pair, the other battery in on the other pair, and guess what? Coming out the other end, you've got double. Just slick and clean and easy to do. Now, putting this thing together is not easy. Now, note that this has got clips on it, and they've got bulkhead mounts that will plug in and clip. Now, this part of it, I see them all the time used at swap meets. They're generally in a junk bin. Sometimes they're free. Unfortunately, you got to pay for this guy. Now, this is what the innards of it look like. It's got to be very carefully bent to allow the contacts to clip in, and I've got instructions posted on my website with all the measurements and exactly how to do this, but they are really, really handy. And there's a link to that on the sheet that we'll send out. Now, my old trailer, I had electric brakes on it, and drove me nuts, drove my wife crazy in there pushing on the brake pedal when that I was trying to adjust the brakes. So I built this. It's a switch that I could turn the brakes on and off from underneath the trailer. Haven't used it since, but I haven't got the heart to throw it away. I might figure out something to do with it sometime. And stuff like this. Now back to the trailer. I had a 30-gallon tank that would sit in the bed of the truck. And so I built a pump and powered it this way. You recognize the trailer connection. And the pump, you turn on the water, it would kick on, and so I could run right directly out of that tank into a hose into the trailer system. And I've used this a lot for handy stuff. Polarity tester. QST January 2013 had a little way of doing it. You get a green light, and I've got one of these here. It's looking good, your polarity, everything's fine, and then you get kind of jumpy. Anybody ever seen a fuse tap? Now, this is kind of a neat little item. Let's say you've got a rental car and you need to get 12 volts out of it. You get into the fuse box and you pull a fuse, plug this in, and then plug the fuse into the tap. Ground this someplace, then you'll find a lot of bare metal up under the hood, and you've got 12 volts coming out of the power pole. No holes in the hide, no damage, no nothing. Got to be a little bit careful as to your current draw, and keep an eye on that, but it works real slick. My latest project. Anybody here have any of the electric battery-powered weed whackers, lawnmowers, anything like that? Well, I've got an electric lawnmower. There's the battery. I've got 3 of these guys. And it was really, really bugging me to have all that electricity sitting out there in the garage and no way of getting to it. So this is what I did. Got it right here. Now you've got the battery that sits on a cradle, snaps in. You can pull it up with the little handle here, and I've got it all spaced to where when you fold it down, the back of it rides against the tapered side to lock it in. A buck converter. And then on the front, PowerPoles and USB. And boy, I'll tell you what, I can do a heck of a lot of cell phone charging on something like this. And I did some research just about all of the companies that sell this stuff. If you dig around, you're going to find that they have got the cradles that they fit into. And a buck converter is about $20 for a 20 amp one. And pretty easy project, really. I paid $20 for the cradle. I could have 3D printed it, but the plans that I found for it, I just didn't like the looks of them, especially when it came to the electrical connection. And for $20, it was worth it to me. And if you have a 3D printer, there is so much stuff out there. Just search for PowerPole. I'll kind of skid through a bunch of these quickly. This is one that I have printed several times. FT817 adapter, surface mount, even got voltage, 4-way splitters, polarity checker. I like this better than the one that I've got because it's a lot smaller. I haven't bothered to print one up. Go to Thingiverse, and you'll discover more absolutely useless stuff there than you can possibly imagine. Tens of thousands of items of things with no use. So it takes some digging, but search for PowerPole and you're going to find quite a bunch. Okay, we get into assembly. Tools. Here's a crimper. It'll do 3 different sizes of PowerPoles. This is my favorite implement. I use it for several things. We'll get into that in a minute because assembling the PowerPoles can drive you a little bit nuts, especially with heavy gauge wire. $14 for a tool that costs them 50 cents to make. It's to insert the contacts into the housing and allegedly to extract. I never had a lot of luck with extraction, but we'll get to that in a minute. Now, this is the one that I use a lot, and it's just basically a screwdriver that I have ground down here and on this surface, and it fits right in under, and you can push the contact ahead with it if there is nothing in the way, meaning the insulation around the wire. That's where the fun begins. Now this, when I started putting everything together on PowerPoles, I had to pick red on one side and black on the other. Well, I did, and guess what the area standard was? The exact opposite, of course. And I had to change everything. And the PowerPoles, when they go together, some of them go together really, really tight, and they're slippery and they're hard to get a hold of. And that's why I built this. I got a write-up in QST on this, by the way, in Hints and Kinks. So you get a cheap pair, 2 cheap pairs of pliers, and you hit them with a bench grinder. And this is one of them, and then the other is ground just exactly the opposite. One's an on and the other is an off. And you'd be amazed how much you use the off to disassemble it. And you very gently grab a hold of it and give it a squeeze, and they just pop right off. And sometimes when you're assembling them, you'll get it almost on and it won't go all the way. And you take the on tool and put it on there and give it a squeeze, and it works real slick. Okay, orientation. Red on the right with the flat side up, if you're looking at it from the wire end. On the left, if you're looking at it from the contact end. So assembly. Select proper contacts. They all fit in the housing. 15, 30, or 45. The 45 amp ones will just about drive you crazy. And that's the 45er over here. They must be crimped. You can't solder them. If you're like working with a 15 on really fine wire, when you crimp it, it's not going to hold. So what you can do is double the wire back and twist it and get it in and then crimp it. Or you can solder it. Align the contacts prior to soldering or crimping if you're using stiff wire. Figure out which is going to be which. Trim the leads to the same length and twist the wire. Use the proper size wire stripper. You don't want to cut any of the conductor. Now, the 30 amp contacts can be split with a knife blade to enlarge them. And what I do is I stand the flat end on a cutting board and then take my pocket knife and go into that seam and just push down. And you can see the one on the right is a factory version, and the one on the left is the one that I've split to get just a bit more capacity. And that works really, really nicely. Okay, if you solder them, use very fine solder. Use enough heat to get in and get out. Don't let the solder get onto the contact area, and clean the flux if it does, if any of that gets on. Now, crimping. The wire's got to fill the contact tube, otherwise it crimps and pulls right out. You got to do it again. Get under good light when you do it. What I like to do is lay the crimper flat on the table, and I don't understand why none of the companies have come out with a table model of the crimper, because you only got so many hands, right? And you're trying to do three things at once, and a table model that you could get everything lined up and hold something like this and push a lever down with your elbow would be really, really nice. But you can do pretty well putting the crimper flat on the table. Insert the contact, wire in it. Slowly squeeze the crimper until it locks. Now here's the jaws of the crimper, 15, 30, and 45. And note that it fits into a socket over here. Insert the wire, hold the wire in the contact with one hand, and then squeeze the crimper with the other until it crimps and releases. 1530s are pretty easy. The 45 can drive you crazy. They've got wings which can catch on the crimping die and spin it. And so you want to be real careful when you center them. And what I like to do is take a pair of pliers and just close those wings a little bit to where that they're not going to catch on the walls of the die when you crimp it. There's a close-up of them. Now here's in the 15. Final assembly. Put the housings together first. Make sure you got the polarity correct. And then you use an insertion tool if necessary. Now, what's ideal, you've got a nice stiff wire, but not too stiff. And you've got that contact, and you just push it in. I'll show you the innards here in a minute, and you hear a nice click, and give it a tug, and you're set. But it gets complicated when you've got limp wire because it's not going to push in, or if you got wire that's got a whole great big wad of insulation all the way around the conductor, and you're trying to force that insulation into the back of the housing, or you end up with you left the wire too long and it doesn't quite make it to the housing. And then, of course, if it butts up against the housing, how are you going to get past that insulation to push it in? That's where that little ice pick looking rig works really good. You go in from the bottom and you can kind of move it around, and generally it'll work pretty good. So here's what it looks like. You've got this spring, and you have to push the contact over the spring. And when you hear that click, it's set. But notice how tight this is back here. If this is a nice stiff wire, you're going to be able to push that in and it's perfect. But if not, you end up with wire that you trim the insulation, and guess what? You've got bare wire showing. And that's where heat shrink comes into play. Now the pin, they sell roll pins, 1/4 inch, to put into this hole to keep the two sides together. Don't bother. A lot of them you don't need it. It's just tight enough so you're set. But I'm trying to remember the RF Power, I think it was, used to show up to Mike and Key Ham Fair, and they went out of business a couple of years ago. But this is how you put pins in, using that same little thing. They told me about this. It works great. And then I discovered something even better, and I got it right up in QST with this too. 0.095 splined weed eater line. And you can see it's got, ridges on it, and takes a little bit of practice. You cut it on a taper, shove it in past, and then take a real fine pair of wire cutters and clip it off square, and then pull it back in just a little bit, and then clip it off the end of the spool, and you're set. My suggestion is club should spring for a roll of this and give everybody about 2 feet of it. It'll last for a real long time, believe me. So how do you hold them together? There's commercial products like this, and note these plug into the hole that you would put the pin into. Or this works just fine. I 3D printed these and occasionally use them. Now we get to the interesting part, disassembly. Next time you go to the dentist, ask, do you have any used dental tools laying around that you're looking to get rid of? You'll be amazed. I generally get some with every visit. And you get one like this, and it makes it real easy to reach in and push that spring down while you're pulling the wire, and you can slide that thing out. Why do you want to disassemble them? Well, you goofed somehow and you want to salvage the housing. You'll end up using a lot more of the contacts than you will of the housings. Or if your dentist isn't willing, for $6 off of Amazon, you can pick up some stuff. And if these don't do it exactly, you can grind them down or something like that, make them fit. Okay, we're getting near the end here. Free advice. Buy as many PowerPoles as you think you're going to need. Buy twice as many as you're going to want, because you're going to use them. That's all there is to it. Buy in bulk. Buy the crimpers. And take everything you've got and put it on PowerPoles. And suddenly life is just an awful lot easier. And then build some of these accessories like the little fuse section, all the rest of it, and you'll be just amazed at how often you're using this stuff. And don't use PowerPoles on other voltages, though you could probably get away with it if you use different colors on the housings, and they make a bunch of them. And I've got my kit with me, and you're sure welcome to take a look at it. Build a kit, because I can pick this thing up and I've got every single thing that I need to do PowerPoles without having to dig around through the drawers. Thank you.